All right, so what's interesting is giving a chapter a title like employment law makes it sound like it's going to be the most boring chapter of all the chapters. Probably some of the laws that we'll talk about in this chapter are some of the more controversial laws that we have in our society that have created just lots of angst over how much power should the federal government have over your business, right? Because if they can tell you who you can and can't hire, they can tell you the reasons you can fire people and the reasons you can't fire people. Suddenly they've made your private business feel a lot like a government entity. And so, like I said, so as much as it sounds like it's pretty benign, employment law can be pretty contentious. All right. So the biggie as far as employment law goes is what's called Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So if you haven't yet read it, Chapter 30, or on yours it's Chapter 50, which is interesting, but Chapter 30 gives a pretty good synopsis, like in 3 pages, of sort of the history of civil rights in America. I mean, you know, of course you could write a whole book on it, but I think they do a pretty good job of covering it in those 3 pages, of sort of telling you how we got to the point where this legislation passed, where there was enough pressure in Congress that people felt like they needed laws to keep people from discriminating against people in the workplace. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then Title VII is the part that deals with employment, okay? Prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, religion, national origin, and color. Nothing else, just those. And it established something called the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. I'm sorry, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. We've learned by now, right, that when legislation passes and it creates an agency of the government, we call that an enabling act. So this was an enabling act. It enabled the president to deal with this law that had a bunch of special provisions relating to employment. Okay. So it applies to employers with more than 15 employees. It also applies to all employment agencies or labor unions that have more than 15 members. It applies to state and local governments, and then, as with most federal regulation, it applies to most federal government employment, meaning there are portions of it that they left exempt. Anybody have a guess of maybe an area that was exempted from some of the provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? The United States military. Okay. Women were not allowed to fight in combat until the 1990s, simply because they were women, right? So the remedies include back pay, reinstatement, and promotion. So in essence, the remedies are like making it right. So if you didn't get promoted because of your race and you could show that, then the remedy is that you get promoted. Okay. What's hard about that is when the government forces someone to promote you, life's not going to be easy for you thereafter, right? Everybody's going to be like, even if everybody sort of accepts it, they're still going to be like, oh, well, that's that woman that went to the EEOC and made us get, you know, and that will always be there. So it's tough. So the people who actually win awards or win promotions or win reinstatement to their jobs over this often face a really difficult time. They have to be pretty tough people who are willing to sort of put up with it, because most people would probably rather just quit and move somewhere else where they'd be appreciated than stay somewhere where nobody likes them. So it takes someone pretty tough to say, I deserve that promotion. I think I was discriminated against, so I'm going to file a claim. And if they get the promotion based on the claim, they know they're going to have to live with, people can't be overtly hostile toward them, but you know how people are. They're people, right? All right. So under Title VII, there's kind of 2 kind of claims that are usually considered. And just so you know, like if you want to like bring suit under Title VII, the way it works is you first go to the EEOC, this entity, and you file a complaint there. Then they do a little investigating, and if they feel like there's merit, then it moves forward. So that's the process. You could file a tort suit if what's happened to you is obvious enough that it could be straight to the courts. But a lot of times things aren't that clear, right? A lot of times discrimination or harassment, it's shades of gray, right? What's okay and what's not okay. You think about the idea of like sexual harassment, which we'll talk about in a minute. We live in a world right now where it's a pretty difficult thing, right? Where we're pretty sure some of these rotten guys that have been caught up and caught through the hashtag Me Too movement, where women are finally speaking out about things that have happened to them, we know they're pretty rotten and they deserve to get in trouble, right? To lose their jobs or whatever. But there's probably other people who maybe their situation's more innocent. And maybe they said something inappropriate one time, and when someone said, hey, I don't appreciate that, they were like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. And sometimes they get swept up in it too. That's the hard thing, right? We're living in a day and age where it's a zero mistake world when it comes to harassment. You know, you have to be careful not to even imply it, not to compliment someone on telling them they look attractive today, because that could seem like it was sexually oriented. And that's a challenging world we're living in right now, right? Rules and laws and things that protect people from being sexually harassed are good things. But always with any rule or law, there's always the potential for someone who maybe with a minor infraction or even an accidental or incidental infraction gets swept up and is punished like the big time evildoer, right? And so this is the challenge we face in today's work environment, to try to be kind and friendly with each other, but not be so friendly that it looks like I'm, making a pass at somebody or something like that. That's a real challenge. So two types. One's called a pattern and practice complaint, and the other is what's called a reprisal and retaliation complaint. So what that means is, under disparate treatment, that means an employee says, I'm being treated differently than other employees based on my race, my gender, my religion. Is that it? National origin. So there could be a pattern and practice of that, meaning they do certain things like black people never get promoted at this place, or women never get the desk jobs. They're always doing the hard work, or whatever. And then what you would have to do if you brought that complaint up is you'd have to be able to demonstrate that. Right? There was a recent thing against Walmart, not recent, it's been several years now, but where female employees, associates, they call them at Walmart, female associates said, we're not getting promoted to management. And so they were able to sort of show, look, there's, this percentage of the workforce are women. And then of the managers who didn't come in through the management training program straight out of college, of the managers who were promoted up from the workforce, this much lower percentage are women. So 50% of the employees are women, and only 10% of the managers are women. And that was the beginning of their case. Then they had to show, well, it wasn't, could it be because women employees want to stay part-time because they have families and they just want to work part-time? So those people aren't going to get promoted to management, right? They had to go through this whole process of kind of showing that there was this pattern of discriminating against women when it came to promotions to management. And I believe Walmart finally just settled and said, okay, here's what we'll do. We will review our practices. We will, they made a list of things they would do, and the people bringing the suit, I guess, felt like that was a sufficient solution. The second type is what's called a reprisal and retaliation. This is where maybe I've done something that was completely within my normal rights, but because I'm a woman, or because I'm Mormon, or because I'm whatever, I'm black or Hispanic, or that there's this reprisal against me. Okay, and a lot of times this comes up when someone files a complaint on this, saying, look, there's this pattern or practice that goes on here where women are mistreated here, and then they get demoted or fired because they filed the complaint, right? You can't retaliate against somebody for filing a lawful complaint. So that's disparate treatment, the idea that you're being treated less favorably than others based on that protected status. The other is what's called disparate impact. This one's a little more difficult sometimes to prove. So the treatment, led to a class of people being impacted less favorably. So here's a good example. If I'm hiring someone to be a teacher here at EAC, and I put in the guidelines, must be able to live 50 pounds over your head, or 100 pounds over your head, whatever. Does that rule impact one gender more than another? Are there fewer females who can lift 100 pounds over their head than males? Probably, okay? And so it has this negative impact on a whole class of people, and the other big and it's not directly necessary for the job. So if we could show it's necessary for the job, well then that's one thing, right? Like to make that rule, yeah, you routinely will be lifting 50 pounds over your head. It's another thing if we don't have any real reason for it, but our actions are limiting an entire class or group of people. So that's a disparate impact, right? So of course the defense is always that this is what's called a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification, which we'll talk about in a minute, for this job. There's a reason why we have this limitation on hiring. And yes, we know it affects women, as an example, more than it affects men. So, but we have a reason. And as long as you can spell out that reason in court, then you're not really discriminating, okay? So this is, kind of the quote that came up from the famous Supreme Court case on the issue. An employer is not free to use any test it pleases. The test must bear a genuine relationship to job performance. So if you create some job to hiring to promotion some test to hiring or to promotion, it's got to bear a genuine relationship to job performance, or else you risk discriminating against a class of people on the basis of that test. Anyway. So here's some of the things, some specifics about a couple of the categories of discrimination. Religious discrimination, of course, on its face, that means refusal to hire or promote someone because of their religion. But the law actually says it could just be based on even like a religious observation. So if somebody has a religious observation, maybe they have holidays that your religion doesn't have, and they're going to want to take those off. Even that's probably not enough that you could say, no, I'm not hiring you because you're going to want Passover off instead of Easter. In essence, the law says it would be a reasonable accommodation to say, you work on this traditional holiday, but you don't work on your religion's holidays, or something like that. At ASU, students in essence can take off holidays that are their religion's holidays, even if they're class days. And there's one part of your brain that's like, that's really awesome, and another part that's like, that gets really hard if you try to start to have all of these exceptions for everybody's holidays instead of just, and I think that's why most places have gotten rid of like religious holidays and say, no, just nationally recognized government holidays. If we stick with those, we're not favoring one religion over another. Even though Christmas, honestly, is a religious holiday, right? But it's also a national holiday. And Easter's on Sunday, so most people don't work on Sunday, but some do. All right. So what this means is you would have to make reasonable accommodations for people. Here's the exceptions. If the accommodation would create an undue hardship on the conduct of the employer's business. So we don't have to accommodate your religion if it will create an undue hardship. But that's as vague as the law is written right there. What does that mean, an undue hardship, right? Most likely, somebody can't say, I want every Sabbath day off. My religion's Sabbath is on Tuesday. Because, sorry, that would be an undue hardship to have one day of the week, every week when this employee couldn't work. Now, the employer is free to do that, to work around that for them if they want. But, that's not something that would probably be an undue hardship. You'd be allowed to say you can't. This is a challenge for some Native American religions or practices. Like when a family member passes away and certain groups of Native Americans will go into this sort of like a family seclusion almost for like a couple weeks or a week. I don't know, I forget what it's called, but some employers are like, I can't let you not work for a week. I have stuff I have to do. And so this question of whether or not that constitutes an undue hardship on the business is one that is challenging at times, right? because someone's like, this is important to me and to my family, to my, my people. And someone else is saying, well, sorry, this is the challenge with having a country of people with many different beliefs. And we know there's many strengths that come from that, but there's also challenges. Here's another exception. Religious organizations can give preferential consideration to members of their own religion. So a Catholic university could give preferential treatment to Catholic professors hiring for the professor job. Okay? Brigham Young University, it's pretty much a condition of employment. You have to be not only a member of the LDS Church, you have to be in good standing with the church. So I'm a Mormon bishop, and I have to, when somebody's applying to get into one of our colleges or to work at one of our colleges or for the Mormon Church, I have to complete what's called an ecclesiastical endorsement. I have to say this member is a member of my ward and they're in good standing in church. So, and that's legal because it's a private institution owned by a religion, so they can give preferential treatment. Same with under Title IX, religious institutions of higher education can give preferential access to students based on their religion, right? Notre Dame University could say, we want 75% of our student population to be Catholic. And they can do that because they're owned by the Catholic diocese. Anyway, so those are some of the exceptions. Another exception that I think kind of fits under the undue hardship that I didn't put on here is if it's a danger. Say somebody's religion required them to wear, really, say, long, loose clothing, and you didn't want to hire them to work around machines with a bunch of spinning parts because of the potential hazard. That would be a reasonable thing, right? To say, look, if you're going to work around these machines, you can't wear that long scarf thing, and they say, well, it's a religious thing. I can't not wear it. And you'd have to say, like, well, I mean, that's a condition for your own safety and for the safety of the organization. Sex discrimination. So again, on its face, refusal to hire or promote someone because of their gender. But the bigger side of this that's really taken on a life of its own legally is sexual harassment. And again, they break down sexual harassment into sort of two types. The first is what's called quid pro quo, which is Latin, which means one thing for the other. Okay. Quid pro quo harassment is when a person makes something in the job dependent upon sort of sexual activity. It doesn't have to be actual sex, It could be like go on a date with me and, I'll make sure that promotion happens for you, right? That would be a clear case of quid pro quo harassment. So it's usually done by a boss to a subordinate, right? Because they have power and they're trying to use that power to gain some sort of sexual favor from someone. But it can be done from peer to peer at times too. I can make sure that as long as the people have been around, they have been leveraging their power to get other people to do things for them, whether it's financial or sexual or whatever. That seems to be an unfortunate history of the human race. People leverage their power to force others to do things they don't want to do. The second is called hostile work environment. And hostile work environment is where you create this place where work is so hostile to somebody based on sexual talk, imagery, or behavior that it makes it hard for people to work, or it interferes with their ability to work is the wording. One time, you guys want to hear the story about when I was sexually harassed in a hostile work environment way? No, the reaction of my wife was to laugh at me. And actually, I went and talked to my boss about it, and he laughed at me, right? So now I was like, I had no recourse. So this happened here at EAC. And it was early in my career here. I was the director of the Small Business Development Center. And what's interesting about hostile work environment is it doesn't have to be someone who's a superior to you. This is someone who worked in a totally different area, had no control over So, and in the beginning, it was kind of like, well, that was weird, but then it became weirder and weirder. So I'm walking down the hall, and there's a lady standing there talking to another lady. I didn't know either of them well. And she goes, she turns to me as I walk by and she says, "Hey, aren't you that guy that has 8 kids?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, if my husband looked like you, I'd have 8 kids too." Right? And so I thought it was like a joke, right? So it was kind of like, okay, like thanks, I guess, or whatever. And I went on my way. And I think if it had just been that, that wouldn't be harassment. That may have been an inappropriate comment that one person would take as a joke, funny, and another person might be like, what did that mean? And I did. I thought it was kind of a joke. Okay, thanks. I guess it's flattering. I know I'm svelte. Uh, but and if it had stopped there, it'd been fine. But then this lady started like seeking me out. She would like, um, give me little looks or a little whistle when I walk by. On Valentine's Day, she brought a little heart-shaped cloisonne box to me in my office, and just thought I might like to have that. And and suddenly, like when I would see her, I'd feel sick to my stomach. Is that weird? Like I would be like, I would try to avoid her. Like if I would see her talking to somebody, I would like go all the way around another way to not have to walk past her. Right? And so this is becoming a hostile work environment. Like I can't function in my job because I'm kind of so weirded out by this. So I go to my wife and she's like, "I think you're pretty hot too, haha." And and like and so there's this part of your brain that's going like this is dumb for me to be that worried about this. Like seriously. And then this other part of my brain that's like I see her and I feel sick and I don't know how to respond to that. So there was never any expectation of anything from a quid pro quo standpoint. There was never like I was going to lose my job or a fear of that. I went to my boss and he was like, well, when a woman finds most guys attractive, they find that flattering, right? And that's true. So now flip the tables. And now you've got a woman who's receiving that sort of treatment. I think in the era we're in right now, that would be taken far more seriously, right? And either one should be taken seriously. But also, if you flip it even more and you say, now this is, say, the woman's boss, and she's worried that like if I don't sort of at least pretend like I appreciate his advances, then I could lose my job or I could face, and I guess that could happen to a man too. But we tend to see it most often. I know this is a big shocker. Most often it's men harassing women. That shocker? And most often it's a superior harassing a subordinate, or these sort of straight across, like the person who works in the cubicle next to you that, he's just infatuated with you or whatever. So recognize that these are both ways that people can be sexually harassed and can sexually harass, and that they're pretty legit. I'm in retrospect glad this happened to me, because now when I hear other guys going like I was sexually harassed, because my attitude was always like, right, like same thing like my boss said, like, dude, is it nice to know someone finds you attractive, and it's like, whoa, no, it was just weird and uncomfortable. So it made me a little more sensitive, I guess, to the issue, getting to go through that. All right, so exceptions to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this is back to the kind of concept of if we're going to like not promote you or something like that. So if someone says, you didn't promote me based on my race, you can say, no, I didn't promote you based on merit, meaning the person I did promote was a better employee than you. Okay, so what's your first impulse when I say that? I can defend against an accusation of discrimination by saying my promotion was based on merit. What would your concern be? How do you prove merit? Other ways, like if somebody had consistently better performance appraisals, that helps. Although you could say, well, you always appraise this person lower because they're a minority, right? You systematically discriminated against the minority. Could it be something that's a little less like subjective to the boss, like customer service appraisals? Like, maybe like if they were going to promote me here, maybe they could look at my student feedback. in addition to some metric like DFW rate, like my students pass my classes better than other teachers, so that's what employers are kind of left to do is you start to come up with these measures that mix the subjective, like an employee employment appraisal, together with objective measures like, even something as simple as like how often they clock in late. That's something you can measure. That has nothing to do with anybody's gender or race. This person has been late 5 times in the last year, and this person hasn't been late at all. This person has a higher customer service rating than this person. This person has fewer, fewer errors if they're on a production line, or whatever. Those would be merit-based things that would be an exception to Title VII. You could promote them based on the fact that they're a superior worker. You just have to be careful that you do so in a reasonable way. Seniority, who's been here the longest? What's the problem with seniority promotions? Some people, doesn't matter if they've been there longer. Some people just aren't worth promoting because they're just taking up space. I mean, hopefully not, but that happens. Anybody ever worked with someone who's been there longer than you, who you're thinking, you've been here 5 years and I've been here a week and I'm already as good as you? There's a problem. That's happened to you? It happens. It was actually my frustration when I was in the military, because we're all salaried, so you get paid based on your rank. And it didn't matter if someone was kind of worthless or someone worked really hard, you all got paid the same, and that was frustrating to me. The bona fide occupational qualification, or BFOQ. So here you can say, I'm going to hire somebody who's a male for this job because I have to have a male for this job. And you better be able to prove that you really have to have a male for this job. Usually it's harder to say I want to hire a male, but that's usually a better defense or exception for things like disparate impact claims. Like the whole, I have to lift 100 pounds over my head. Yes, that impacts women more than it impacts men, but if you can show, come see the job, it involves lifting 100 pounds over your head, I have to have that requirement. So that is a bona fide occupational qualification, the ability to lift 100 pounds over your head. This sometimes comes into play. There's a pretty interesting lawsuit with a Hooters, because they had a certain bona fide occupational qualification to be a waitress at their store. In essence, they went to court because someone said, you didn't hire me, and why didn't you hire me? And they said, because you didn't fit the image of a Hooters waitress. And the person said, that's discrimination. First of all, bust size is not a protected class. Gender is, but not bust size. So that made it hard for them to really have a case. Secondly, in essence, what Hooters said is, look at our business model. You might find it distasteful or inappropriate, but nonetheless, people who come here expect a certain thing, and we want to deliver a certain thing. It's part of our business model. And it got thrown out. Okay, I mean, sometimes the law has to be blind to whether or not you or me or the judge thinks it's sort of distasteful. This is more about with someone legally, disqualified from a job or illegally disqualified from a job. And then another exception is something called affirmative action. Can anybody tell me what affirmative action is? Yeah, Bryson. Right. So it's or it's completely racism depending on your standpoint, right? Yeah, that's the thing that's hard about affirmative action. So the idea behind affirmative action is that it establishes quotas for hiring based on race or gender to sort of correct past, past inequalities. Okay, so maybe a place says, look, 40% of our community is African American, but only 20% of our police officers are African American. So as we hire, we are going to hire more African American officers until we get some parity there with the community at large. Okay? And the courts have said that's legal. You could discriminate against white or Hispanic applicants in favor of African American applicants in that situation because it falls under an affirmative action program. And again, it doesn't matter if you like it or don't like it. Usually the person who doesn't get the job because of it doesn't like it, but there's been a legal precedent set for it. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. You're right. So there is a shift that is shifting away from sort of just blanket affirmative action. Now it's more like there's the courts are looking for like more tests of like, is there a reason for this? Is there a lack of parity here that still needs to be adjusted? Where it used to just be like blacks were discriminated against in the past, so now or Hispanics or whatever group. So there's a shift. But what's important for this class is recognizing that we may be allowed to discriminate on the basis of race or gender if there is a reasonable affirmative action plan in place that states this is what we're doing and why. Okay. All right. And then this is less than an exception, but a defense. Companies can defend themselves against sexual harassment cases if they exercise reasonable care to prevent and correct harassment, meaning in essence they have a policy about it and they actually follow that policy. So that say somebody turns in a complaint of sexual harassment to the management then looks at what the policy is and follows it, goes and reprimands the person who does it, and offers counseling to the person who was a victim of it, and and if the person does it again, they fire him or whatever. So if they exercise reasonable care, and if the plaintiff unreasonably fails to take advantage of the preventative or corrective opportunities, meaning like if you'd gone to your boss would have done this and that, but you didn't go to your boss. So what happens here is when somebody then files a complaint, the EEOC comes in and looks at it and says, did you do all these things? And if the answer is like, no, I didn't follow my company's policy in reporting this, then they're going to say your company's not really liable because they've shown that they do everything in their power to keep you safe, but you didn't do your part. Whereas if they report it and then management doesn't act and then they go file a complaint, now management's in trouble. The reason this defense is important is because the person who harasses you is always liable. Okay, because they harassed you, you could sue them. But the company is only liable if they didn't take some reasonable care to prevent it or deal with it if it was reported. Okay, so it doesn't always have to be reporting even, because it could be prevention too. Like let's just say that there's a bunch of stuff going on, everybody always knows about it, and the company doesn't do anything about it. Even without the report, you could say you didn't take any care to prevent this from happening. Other anti-discrimination laws, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, or the ADEA, you can see it's been revamped a couple times. Right now it prohibits employers from discriminating on the basis of age, but it only applies to workers over the age of 40. So you can discriminate on youngness, but not on oldness. That's interesting. Like I could say, you just look too young and experienced, I'm not hiring you. I don't have to say it that way though, right? And it's still, the BFOQs still apply. So there are times when you say, like, let's say police officers, firefighters, where they're allowed to say, hey, everybody has to retire at age 55 because this job is physically demanding. Okay. Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits employers from discriminating on the basis of disability. And it says you cannot disqualify an employee as long as he or she can perform the essential functions of the job with reasonable accommodation. Reasonable is a really difficult word legally, right? What's reasonable to you might not be reasonable to me. Anybody notice the huge sidewalk thing that they built outside of our our fine arts center. So it's like this huge sidewalk ramp that gets down to those lower piano practice rooms. Do you know why they built it? Can you guess? A specific person. Yeah, because he had limited mobility. And the reason they did that crazy ramp like that is because other rules are if we were to alter the building, say put a lift there so he could go down, if we were to alter the building, then the rules say we would have to make the entire, because buildings built before this law are grandfathered in. They don't have to become accessible. But anything, so if you alter a non-accessible building that's grandfathered, now you have to make everything, the bathrooms, everything accessible. That would have cost us millions of dollars. So by altering the land next to the building, that served the purpose of allowing our employee access where he needed to, but without forcing us to have to revamp the whole building for millions of dollars. Instead, it probably cost us $50,000 or something like that. But let me ask you, is 50 grand reasonable? Well, maybe it would have been easier to like move a piano up to a practice room upstairs, right? Or, those are the, so that's my point, is what's reasonable to one business is not reasonable to another. I know my friends own CMI. You guys know CMI? CMI, I think they are over the exclusion. I think they have more than 15 total employees. So, they have to make like their restrooms ADA compliant. Well, that costs them $20,000 to revamp everything. A business that size, 20 grand is a serious amount of money. In their mind, they're thinking, that's not a reasonable accommodation. That's killing me, right? And don't get me wrong, they're great people, and they wanted to do it to not only be compliant, but to be there for their customers and employees who needed an appropriate restroom to use. But to do all the little rules to make it compliant can get quite expensive. Equal Pay Act, both men and women are protected from pay discrimination based on sex or gender. And what that means is for a job where it requires the same skill and effort, you should be paid the same. Because I think sometimes people think that, like we may have instructors here at the college that get paid more than other instructors. And usually that's because private industry pays a certain field more than another field. So to get an instructor to leave private industry, we may have to offer something more than what we have to for another person. Okay? So equal skill, equal effort. So the common law talked about something called employment at will. That means that in essence, the employer employs you at their will. And if they decide for any reason that they don't want to employ you anymore, they can just no longer employ you. But this concept's been challenged in the United States, especially through federal legislation. All those laws I just talked about, right? Now there's limitations to the reasons you can fire a person. You can't fire them because you don't like their gender. So it's not truly an at-will scenario anymore. It's a limited at-will scenario. State legislation. Some states have like really, really rigid laws about how and why you can fire people. Arizona, not so much. Arizona is called a right-to-work state, which really means right to fire state, honestly. It means that employers pretty much have an at-will relationship with you. Even here at the college, where people think of tenured professors, we're all on like 30-day at-will. That's written into our contracts. They could fire you for any reason within 30 days. We sign a one-year contract. So if we were terminated, they'd probably buy out the end of our year. But like California, I know you hadn't guessed it'd be California. They have tons of protections for workers written into theirs. Okay, and then the courts have recognized something called a tort of wrongful discharge, meaning you can't fire people. There's limits to the reason you can fire people. Like you can't fire them for refusing to violate the law, for exercising their legal rights, performing a legal duty, or in a way that violates public policy. You can't fire people for that. I think we have just one more. We're about out of time. Sorry, we got started late. These are just other employment-related laws. The Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, WARN, says that you have to, if you're going to close down your business, you've got to give people 60 days notice, so you don't just bail on them. Okay. Employee Polygraph Protection Act, you can't use lie detector tests on your employees unless you have a reasonable suspicion they've committed a crime like stolen from you. Then you can do it, but not for as a condition of employment. Again, federal government is exempt from that. And when I worked for the NSA, National Security Agency, I had to do polygraph tests to keep my security clearance. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Act, employers have a duty to furnish a workplace free of recognized hazards. Makes sense, right? It should be a safe place to work. And it gives the Secretary of Labor authority to set national safety standards. Employee Retirement Income Security Act. This is because as pension plans were getting huge, employers were like ripping off their pension plans, kind of like the federal government does with Social Security. Again, they're exempt. But the rest of us have to follow these rules. There's something like $1 trillion sitting in pension plans in the United States right now. So that can be pretty tempting for an employer that's going through a tough time to sort of reach into their pension money that employers had taken out of their own paychecks to save up and pilfer that, right? Fair Labor Standards Act prohibits most forms of child labor. In most jobs, you have to be 16 during the school year and 14 to work during the summer, and establishes a federal minimum wage. And just so you know, state laws on like minimum wage or almost all of these, as long as they are more severe than the federal law, then the federal law sort of goes with the state law. So the state can't say set a minimum wage lower than the federal laws, but they could set one higher. If a state wants to set it at $15 an hour, remember that whole big fight for a while there, a state can do that. Okay, and then workers' compensation laws. This is like if you get hurt on the job, this is a set amount of weekly compensation that the employer has to provide you if you're hurt on the job, and the rules regarding how your medical bills get paid if you get hurt on the job. All right, that's all we have for this chapter. I apologize we got started late, and I appreciate your attention, and you can rejoice in knowing that was the last one of these.